This is the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria, session number 48.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Hey everyone, welcome to session 48 of the Behavioral Observations Podcast. I am joined today by Dan Law of the Liberty Insurance Company, and we're going to talk about insurance. Yay! So before you start looking for another podcast to listen to, or before you start typing an angry email to me saying, why are you having this on instead of something about ethics or functional assessment or ACT or whatever, let me explain here for a minute. This episode was something that was suggested to me to consider. I threw it out to some groups on social media, particularly the ABA Business Builders group, and the response was pretty overwhelming. This is a topic that people are pretty interested in, and I'm going to be honest with you, I found it oddly fascinating myself, and so we get into that a little bit in this podcast. Dan brings a wealth of knowledge in the area of risk management. He has been supporting ABA practitioners for several years now, and he's one of the few insurance providers out there who actually understands what we do. Some of the feedback I got in the ABA Business Builders group were from people who were frustrated because when they went to buy workers' comp and things like that, their brokers had no idea how to classify an ABA-based business. So, again, I think you'll find this interesting, even if you're not in the position in your organization to be purchasing these things. We talk about risk management in general and some of the crazy things that he's seen happen out there, and I think it'll just give you some additional awareness if you're in a home or you're out in the community or if you're in a clinic working directly with individuals. So I think there's something here for everyone. But before we get to that, I do want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Chartlytics. Yes, it's our old friend Chartlytics. What do they do? Well, they do a bunch of different things. They're kind of a tech company. They're a consultation company, and they are an education company, and they do all these things rather well. On the tech side, they have taken all the guesswork out of using the standard acceleration chart. They've automated that process, so it works fairly seamlessly. On the education side, they are doing all sorts of things. They're doing workshops all around the country and even some in Canada on using precision teaching to accelerate your ABA practice. And they're a consultation company. They work directly with agencies all over the place. So they just started the ambassador program, which I'm enrolled in. We had a meeting earlier this week. It's a really fun process that I'm digging into. So I'll be keeping you posted about that. We had our first lesson on pinpointing behaviors, and so it's a really interesting food for thought. So for more information about Chartlytics, go to chartlytics.com/Matt. And there's a bunch of freebies and discounts and things like that there. So again, check it out at chartlytics.com/Matt. I also want to let you know that in May, I will be co-hosting a webinar with Adrian Fitzer of the Applied Behavior Analysis Center. And we're going to be featuring session 15 guest, Rich Brooks, and we're going to talk about all things digital marketing. So that will be on May 16th. At 6:30 Eastern Time. And if you go to behavioralobservations.com and look for session 48, I'll have that information down at the bottom of the post. Or you can go to abacnj.com and then search for webinars by month. Click on the month of May, and you will see my logo right next to Adrian's. So I'm really looking forward to doing this. So it'll be a live workshop. It'll be great fun. And there'll be two Type 2 ethics CEUs for the event. So again, I hope this is something that you'll be able to check out, especially if you have an interest in marketing and putting your best foot forward, at least digitally speaking. So anywho, that's it for opening remarks. So without any further ado, please enjoy this fun conversation with Dan Law. Dan Law, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate coming on. This is we've had non-behavior analysts on the show a couple of times before, but I don't believe we've had anyone with your unique background, so I'm excited to dig into it. So we're here to talk about all things coverage, I suppose. And I don't know if that's the right term or not, and I'm sure you'll have ample opportunity to correct me. But this is something that I didn't think folks would be into. I'm going to be honest with you, Dan.
Yeah, it's not everybody's favorite subject, believe it or not. I get a lot of eye rolls and things like that when we talk to folks, but that's okay. It's the life I've chosen.
Well, but the funny thing is, though, is that when I threw this topic out to the ABA Business Builders Facebook group, I got a huge response. I was overwhelmed with the interest in this topic. So I was like, all right, well, yeah, this is kind of, and when you and I had a chat a while back talking about this topic, I found myself kind of becoming weirdly fascinated with it. So this has been an unexpected thing. So anyway, so you're work for the Liberty Company Insurance group, and so what I want you to do is, if you can just start by talking about how you started working with ABA companies. I know you've been doing it for a little while. And things like
Sure.
that. So, how'd you get into this particular area of insurance?
Yeah, happy to share the stories. I initially started, I've been in the insurance business on the commercial side for, call it 15 years now. It's all I've ever really done professionally. And, early on in my career, operated with a lot of different industries. I'm in the Bay Area in California, so a lot of high-tech clients and things like that. And then just by happenstance, one of my marketing folks sent me out to a business meeting with an ABA agency here in the Bay Area. And I tried to learn about what that person did, of course, before the meeting, and do all my regular meeting prep. And they had about 100 employees at the time, and we knew they had some work comp issues and things, but I didn't know what ABA was. So go to the meeting, learn more about them, and find it a very interesting and unique field. And then as I'm reviewing their insurance coverage, which is a common practice that we do around here, I noticed that, what they thought they had, they didn't have. What they thought they were protected for, they weren't really protected for. And, like most agency owners, very good on the clinical operations side, a clinician really running the business and somebody dedicated to helping out children, but maybe not quite as savvy on the business ops side of things. We find that trend quite a bit. So that's really how we got into it around here. Was I came back from that meeting and from the policy review and just said, this is somebody that needs some assistance. And then learned more about the business. As I do, I threw myself into education mode and found out everything I could and researched the industry. And we've been off to the races since then. That was about 7 or 8 years ago now.
Cool. Well, I want to dig into that in more detail, but first, from a professional culture standpoint, it sounds like you work with a bunch of different occupations. And so what is it like working with behavior analysts? I've heard other people say, who support behavior analysts in various roles, and say, you guys are a different bunch. I'm wondering if you had that type of reaction, especially compared to, say, like, dentists or, a dry cleaner or anything, under the sun. So is there anything unique about working with folks in my line of work?
I will tell you this, and I'm really not pandering. That's not what I do, but they seem to be a lot more kind than we get in other industries.
Really?
Everybody just seems to have more patience and maybe more bandwidth for an open conversation. Very interested in learning themselves about what they can do to improve things. That's a real common theme we get is everybody, Dan, you tell me how to do it, or tell me how it should be done, or talk to me about what other people are doing. And they're always happy to share and give their thoughts. And I connect a lot of agency owners together who, hey, John Doe, I was talking with Jane Doe the other day and she's doing this. Maybe I should connect the two of you and you guys can talk about it a bit. But it's just that kindness and the willingness. We don't get that in a lot of other industries. We get people that are rushed and angry and upset and things like that. So,
okay, yeah, I was going to ask you that. Is like, so the opposite is also true? So that people are unkind, impatient, etc.
Oh, my account management team gets yelled at more than I would like to admit, and I would say most of the time not by our doing. It's somebody that is just put themselves in a pinch and looking for an outlet of somebody to yell at, and that tends to fall on us sometimes. We're an easy target, I guess, in a lot of cases for a lot of other industries. So.
Yeah, I think, when you say, oh, the insurance companies, it's like the boogeyman, right? It's some convenient whipping, post or whatever. So
it tends to be that way. We're not everybody's favorite. We're something that, you have to have, you hope you don't ever need. And everybody's, one experience is with an auto insurance claim that wasn't paid out the way they should have thought it should have been or whatnot. So bad taste in a lot of people's mouth, but hopefully we can change that a bit.
All right, cool. So you teased this a few minutes ago, and so I kind of want to get into it in a little bit more detail. So I think one of the common themes that came up in the feedback that I got from folks that I was talking to about this interview is, the risks that ABA providers face. So what are the unique risks that we face in this field that perhaps we might not know about, or B, that are just different than other occupations?
Well, they're varied, and it really depends on the type of agency that we're dealing with. Take a home-based provider, for example, and you're sending your employees into largely unknown environments with, in some cases, a little bit of an unpredictable patient. And that is a very unique business to be in. And we do not see it in other industries out there. Your standard doctor's office doesn't deal with any of that. Your standard daycare provider is really an enclosed environment that they're familiar with and that they can control. You've got a population of employees that you're sending into the lion's den in some cases. And so we try to actually focus a lot on that and understanding through the intake process where you're sending your folks so you can train your employees appropriately, make sure they understand the risks before they get to somebody's home, or maybe not risks, but special characteristics of that individual's house. So, those are just a couple of examples. Clinic setting is a little bit different. The most akin industry we can really find is daycare, but it's not a real solid fit. We borrow a lot of policies and procedures from a risk management standpoint from daycare operations to our ABA clinic clients, but it's not the same exposure. It's really different. And insurance carriers have a hard time grasping that when we're talking to them about the risk that people are facing.
I see. So speaking to that risk, what are specific areas that people should consider coverage for? I think before we were recording, I think you had mentioned there's at least a handful of things that people should really consider having in place to protect themselves.
Definitely. So the most common one is the professional liability insurance, right? And that's almost the basic, just entry-level item you need. Any agency needs, any BCBA needs it for credentialing purposes. So that's really the starting point for most of the conversations with folks. That's the number one item you have to have. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, what's interesting is it's also the item where we don't see a lot of claims arising from, which
that's good,
kind of
right?
speaks. Yeah, and it really shouldn't. We don't expect to see them, but it really speaks to the cost of that coverage. In some places, you can get it very, very inexpensive for pretty significant limits because, claims don't arise out of that stuff typically in this industry. But there are some other items from a risk management standpoint that we really do want to focus on. One being the auto liability insurance. You've got a mobile workforce that you're putting out there in the field, and understanding the risks that they pose to themselves and the public, and how to protect yourselves as the business owner against those risks is vitally important to any ABA agency. So, just thinking that, my 22-year-old RBT has their personal liability insurance and that's going to respond is not enough, and is not really, that's more of a head in the sand type approach to your risk management than actually going out and purchasing the coverage. But purchasing the coverage, again, is not terribly expensive for that item, but there are other risk management protocols you should have in place too.
I see.
I think as far as, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know also in certain states, I think that's the case here in New Hampshire, is that, certain states you don't have to have insurance. I know this probably sounds crazy in some respects, but so it's probably even more the case if you reside in one of those types of states, right?
It's very much so. And even in California, the minimum insurance limits that a lot of people buy out there for their personal auto, call it $15,000 for property damage. That doesn't get you very far in an auto accident or, driving a vehicle into a retail store. We had a claim for that where somebody, not paying attention in a neighborhood that they hadn't really been in before, first time meeting with a new client, trying to find parking. They're confused. It's dark outside. And lo and behold, somehow, some way, they ended up driving into a storefront. Well, their personal liability doesn't go very far in the event of that, and the business is going to be held liable in excess of the personal auto insurance.
Wow, that sounds like one of those State Farm commercials or something like that.
Right.
Like the Wall of Fame of claims.
Exactly. Other insurance items that people really need to look at are, the abuse and molestation coverage. Obviously, we hope nobody has any claims arising out of that, but all it really takes is an allegation to put somebody out of business. Everybody's doing their background checks and sexual abuse registry checks and things like that, but that just tells you about what has happened with an employee in the past. It doesn't tell you about their future behavior. That the insurance coverage for the abuse and molestation is very important in our eyes. And then the workers' compensation. As anybody knows who's had an injured worker, that can be largely the cost driver for, as far as insurance is concerned, for ABA agencies.
And as far as workers' comp is concerned, what injuries do you see as common in our field?
I don't think it'll surprise anybody out there. The headbutts and the biting are really the most frequent injuries that we see. They tend not to be that costly in a lot of cases, although we've had some concussions and other things arise out of it. But those are the two most frequent items. The less frequent claims arise from a bending or a twisting or something like that. You've got an RBT getting up off the floor after working with a kid and they tweak their back a bit. Those soft tissue injuries are really the ones that'll drive your claims costs. Those are the ones that get pretty expensive. And then auto accidents. On a frequency basis, we do see a lot of auto accidents while the person is driving on company time, arising out of or the course of employment. That's the terminology we use. And if that's the case, that's a work comp compensable injury. So we see those quite a bit as well.
I see. So we got professional liability, auto liability, abuse and molestation, and workers' comp. Those are the four big ones. Do you have any others that are those like the ones that bottom line you're going to want to consider?
Bottom line, you're going to want to consider those. I strongly urge ABA agencies to look at the cyber liability and data breach as well. And it's kind of the Wild West as far as those coverages are concerned. They're still being developed. Every insurance company has different terms, different coverage forms. But typically you want those two items on an insurance policy. They're a very good idea to have in place. You're collecting personally identifiable information, HIPAA information, and you're on the line if there's a data breach. Rarely is it going to be everybody always says, oh, it's, Central Reach or whoever else stores all that stuff. Well, that's great. And it's all, encrypted and whatnot, but it doesn't absolve you of liability. It's the collector of the information that is responsible ultimately, and not the party that's storing the data.
I see. One thing I want to circle back to workers' comp, because I think that's going to come up a couple times here, is what do you work with companies to address? Let's say you have a company that has a lot of claims for workers' comp. Is that something that a group like yourself would work with them with from a behavioral safety standpoint? It's oddly enough, there's a huge behavioral safety wing, if you will, or application of behavior analysis, and I wonder to what extent that's being, if we're taking our own medicine as it relates to that. You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes at the detriment, I think, of the employees, because they're doing everything in their power to protect a child from injuring themselves or something else, and yet the employee gets an injury. So, the de-escalation training is very important. The safety cares of the world and things like that is very important to employee training. But yeah, we do work with clients and even non-clients in some case to address what their employee training regiment looks like. RBT standards, 40 hours and things like that are very helpful. But again, they often focus on the client-facing aspect as opposed to defensive positions you can take to protect yourself, or simply not putting yourself in a position to get injured. So yeah, we work on training all the time. Everything from defensive driving. We try to analyze an employer and figure out where their specific claims frequency is coming from and claim severity, and then we dive into operational practices to help them with those things, and we try to provide training materials and support and guidance on an ongoing basis to reduce those frequency and severity of injuries. So most insurance companies, and it's not just me, a lot of brokers out there, a lot of insurance companies have resources for this stuff. It's just a matter of tapping into them. It's like anything else. If you don't know what you don't know. So asking those questions of your insurance carrier and getting the free employee training videos that they have, or having somebody from their loss control team out to your clinic to take a look around, a lot of these services are free to clients and they should be utilized. So asking the right questions, making sure your provider can offer some guidance on that stuff. It's not just me doing it. So there are a lot of people out there.
I think I know what you mean by a loss control team, but could you further define that?
Yeah. So most insurance companies will have, safety engineers, if you will, on staff, people that are trained in both physical safety aspects of your business, making sure you have fire extinguishers in the right place in your office, making sure you have a first aid kit that's appropriately stocked. That's the very simple stuff. But a loss control specialist can also come in and train your staff on how to lift appropriately, how to set up a desk ergonomically so they're not receiving those types of injuries. They'll provide information on, defensive driving that should happen, or, standards you should have in place for cell phone use while driving in a vehicle. So that's all encompassed with the quote unquote loss control services that an insurance company, anything that's going to reduce the impact of a loss, claim, or prevent them from happening at all. Insurance carriers have huge departments focused on these things.
I see. Thank you. That's helpful.
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times.
That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEs. One other question I had, Dan, and I think, again, is something that came up in our previous conversations, is sometimes behavior analysts will have kind of like side gigs, if you will, and they might work for an agency, but they might do supervision with aspiring behavior analysts, and do that on evenings and weekends, or free time or what have you. And I'm wondering what the insurance aspect of that is. Is that something that they should be concerned with getting a policy for?
Yeah, we get the question a lot, and I would say this, that my client is the agency itself. So my focus is on protecting the agency, and from that standpoint, the best risk management approach is, if somebody is going to operate outside of their duties of employment, then, and that means those weekends, those outside supervision and things like that, they need to be covered elsewhere for those things. So yes, having your own personal policy that covers you outside of, your specific work duties would be pretty important, and I think make a lot of sense. And it's not terribly expensive to do. I mean, CPH and Associates will write you an individual policy for, it used to be $150 for a year. It might be a little bit more than that now, but it's not bad coverage to get.
I see, and it's probably well worth it, I guess, if something were to happen.
Yeah, you don't want them coming up after your homeowner's insurance or your renter's insurance or you personally for anything. So I think it's a pretty simple mechanism to, have the insurance carrier step up if you had that coverage in place.
Okay.
I know I would do it.
Good to know. All right, cool. So as I said earlier, this generated a lot of buzz in the on some of the Facebook groups, and it generated some questions here. So let me hit you up with some listener questions here. I got some good ones. All right.
Great.
Allie writes, and Allie owns an agency here in New Hampshire. She writes in and says, we recently had trouble with risk pools because insurers don't know how to classify ABA providers. We're not an educational or medical provider, yet we're not mental health. People have asked us for childcare license numbers, medical malpractice, and workman's comp classifications. The overarching question has been, what do you do? This has made it hard for us when determining workman's comp classifications, etc.
You need to keep having those conversations. It can be difficult, but I would suggest, and this is going to seem self-serving, but you should find a broker that works with other people in your space and has insured other people that you trust. So it is imperative in the insurance world that you have somebody communicating on your behalf to the insurance carriers in an effective means and can explain your business. Right away, every insurance carrier's knee-jerk reaction is, no, we don't want to do that because we don't understand it. And it's the broker's responsibility to, temper down those fears and get the underwriter to really comprehend what the risk is. It's better if they have a broader understanding of your industry so they can explain, claims trends and where we would expect to see things from, and then how those are going to be, what sort of services we're going to provide to lessen the impact of any of those claims with you particular as a client. So it is a difficult space to really describe, and I can understand the issue with risk pools or self-insurance funds or anything like that, because it's the industry is a little immature for those things thus far. I think it will start heading into an environment where you're going to get some large national insurance carriers willing to take a stab at things. But yeah, it is very tough to describe. In California, the appropriate work comp class code is 8868 for your employees in the field. And what that translates to is colleges or schools. So it's the same class code they use for teachers at a private school. Well, we all know that's not really the risk profile of your RBTs out in the field. But so far, California has said, yep, well, that's the one we're using for now until a different code is adjusted. So we kind of use that for the basis for codes throughout the country, but every state is a little bit different with what they're willing to do.
Okay, and just so we can stay on the same page term-wise, what's a layman's definition of risk pool?
A risk pool would be like an industry trade group or something like that has formed an insurance policy or just created an insurance company. They can be done on a state level, they can be done on a national level, and it's where, somebody would put together a group insurance policy that then everybody else could subscribe to that fit within that industry or that trade association. So one exists for ABAI, their professional liability policy through the Huntington broker team. That's technically a risk pool, I guess. It's a master insurance policy created for ABA providers, and then people can just subscribe to it. And, I don't know all the ins and outs of that particular product, but, it's fairly inexpensive. I know that.
All right, got it. Kirsty writes in, when running a social skills group in a community setting rented by the hour, what do we need to do to protect ourselves from liability to allow the families of the clients and the families of the peer buddies to leave their children with us for a couple of hours?
This is a great question. So this kind of gets to the basis of what we're really trying to do. The insurance coverage is great, right? Everybody should have it, and it'll protect you in the event that you're sued. But the ultimate goal is to prevent a lawsuit in the first place, because they suck up time and energy and everything else. So what Kirsty's talking about is really what we try to focus on when we're talking with people. You need those appropriate waivers in place from parents. Just a general, liability waiver. You sign them all the time when you go to a kid's birthday party at a jumpy house place. You're signing a waiver. People are so familiar with doing it anymore, they really don't even read them. But a well-crafted waiver by essentially everybody that's involved in the situation would be a great starting point for the owner, for the agency to have in place. So if the parents are going to leave people there, we always worry about supervision. We want to make sure there are no one-on-one situations between a clinician and a child. Other adults present, other kids present, no closed door type operations where there's no video or something like that. So, that's just to prevent the allegation of abuse. Mm-hmm. But the really what I'd suggest is the liability waiver, making sure it's up to snuff, have somebody review it. You can pull one off Google these days. You don't have to pay a bunch of money for it. And that'll at least give you a good baseline for things.
I see. And then Janelle wanted to piggyback on that. She has a question about liability related to a therapist consenting to use their own kids as neurotypical models in social skills groups. That happens certainly from time to time.
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I've never seen a lawsuit arise out of anything like this, and that's where we get a lot of our information from. I would think the waiver that you have the other people sign in the social skills group would absolve you of any sort of liability in the event that your child were to cause injury to somebody else. Just a good solid waiver in place would probably get you out of any of those situations. And if it didn't, I would rely on your general liability insurance to pick up. If we're talking about injury to another kid or something like that, a good waiver goes a long way.
So if an RBT or a BCBA or someone else is running a social skills group and they say, oh, I've got a kid of the same age, and that they want to pull into that because it's clinically appropriate or would be helpful in one way or the other, you'd want that staff member to sign the waiver as well. Is that what I'm hearing, or did I?
I think that no. I think you're right on that point. I think that would make a lot of sense to have the staff member. You don't want to be in a situation where if their child were injured, they're then suing their employer because that situation was allowed to happen, right?
Yeah.
So you want to have a liability waiver from that staff member in those types of instances. In a lot of cases, as the agency owner, you're probably not going to force that person to use their own child. So if they're electing to do so because it's clinically, appropriate, then, having them sign a waiver that, says, hey, I'm allowing my kid to participate here. I'm aware of the issues and the concerns involved, and absolving the employer of any liability with it would make a lot of sense from a risk management standpoint for the organization.
Cool. Got it. Dustin writes, can you discuss how to negotiate your rates for both liability and also getting coverage for employees with regard to health and dental insurance? Are there any companies that will offer lower rates for getting it all through them? What are considerate percentages to pay if you're the employer, and how do you make an attractive healthcare package for employees without it costing them or yourself too much? So there's a lot in that question, and we could take it kind of piece by piece. So maybe the first is it advantageous to try to group all these different services or products together?
So you're not going to find an insurance carrier that's going to provide you with the liability insurance and the professional liability insurance and also insure your employees for health and dental. They're two segmented parts of the industry, if you will. So you'll get your employer group health plans through Anthem Blue Cross or Cigna or something like that. But those are not insurance companies in the property casualty space. Those are not insurance companies that offer liability protection to an employer or workers' compensation or anything like that. I always suggest getting as much insurance as you can in one spot, even if it's not for rate negotiation. It can dovetail the coverages very well and protect you in the event that, let's say you buy your professional liability insurance from carrier X and you buy your general liability insurance from carrier Y. If there's a claim that could be in both of those worlds, you're going to get insurance carriers pointing fingers at the other one, trying to get out of covering the claim. If you just had one insurance carrier that covered them both, then you would just send it in and, tough. They're going to have to cover it one way or another. But it doesn't work like, your homeowners or your auto, where if you have a good driver discount or anything like that, that stuff doesn't really exist. As far as the employee health insurance, this is a very competitive space. And what we see is, retention of employees is an issue. Hiring of employees is an issue. In most areas that we operate in, there are way more caseload than you have RBTs to provide services. So everybody is trying to get and attract talent and keep talent once they have it in the door. So we have certain employers that offer longevity benefits in terms of their employee health insurance. They'll pay more per month for employee after their 1-year anniversary on the job or 2-year anniversary. So we do have clients that take those strategies. They become tough to administer, but people do it. But yeah, providing a comprehensive set of benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, maybe some life insurance, an employee assistance program. Those are all benefits that are pretty widely used employee retention measures in the ABA world as far as we're concerned. As far as contribution levels, it varies pretty wildly. In general, the minimum percentage you're going to have to contribute on behalf of your employees is 50%. And we have more people that do a lot higher than that than the other way around, if that makes sense. So more people are contributing, say, 80 or 90% of their employee health insurance amount, than providing lower percentages.
And to get at what you're saying earlier, is it presumably to stay competitive and to offer a well-rounded benefit and compensation package?
Exactly. I mean, that's really where it's driven. It's all driven by the ability to hire and retain people. And when wages can be pretty competitive out there, people tend to focus on the other stuff. As the employee population ages, I would expect that those will become even more important things. We don't see a lot of the younger RBTs focus too much on health insurance yet. They don't have kids, they maybe not be married and things like that. But as they step up into their late 20s or early 30s, that's typically when those life events happen. And then all of a sudden their personal health insurance becomes much more vital.
Absolutely.
As well as I do, with a couple of kids, the doctor bills can rack up pretty easily, and the health insurance is an important part of things.
Absolutely. Dustin has another question, and it relates to what you were saying earlier when you brought up daycares. And so, if there was an ABA treatment center that also had a daycare for neurotypical kiddos, would you need two different policies, or could you roll that up into one plan? I'm paraphrasing his question a little bit for the purpose of
right. You could, in theory, if it's the same business, you could roll different types of operation into one plan. So if it was the same corporation that operated the daycare and a clinic, you shouldn't really have a problem rolling up. It's largely the same coverage items that they need. They need the abuse coverage, they need general liability, they need the work comp. You'd probably add some additional coverage items just to make sure you're protecting, like if a kid is hurt in a daycare setting, we place what's called student accident coverage. And it covers accidental death and dismemberment to kids. It's not very expensive, but it's a nice thing to have there and can put parents at ease a little bit, especially if something does happen, God forbid. So you can roll them into the same one. There may be business reasons to have them separated, separate legal entities that need their own profit centers or whatnot, or you need to allocate premium in a certain way, or say you don't want an injury that occurs at one place to use up all your insurance limits for the ABA side of the business. So there may be business reasons to separate them, but largely the same people that are going to underwrite a daycare operation as it stands right now are going to underwrite an ABA business.
And are those considerations that you just mentioned, is that something that the broker works with the agency on figuring out what would be the best fit?
Exactly. And should likely present you with a couple of different options of ways to do it. So you can vet these things, from a business and operation standpoint to see what makes the most sense for your particular setup. So we're going to be working with one of our clients right now. They told me last week that they're planning on opening up a daycare. It will operate as a standalone daycare. It may be under the same corporate name, but it's a separate location, its own facility, and really is just going to be a daycare operation from my understanding. So we're going to look at a couple different options of ways to ensure that appropriately. This is a larger ABA business, a few hundred employees out there. So, different risk profile than some of these 10 and 15 person agencies.
I see. All right. And Heather asks about the liability associated with transporting clients within the community. So I think we covered the car piece, right? But certainly therapists in certain situations might be out doing something in the community, and it might involve something like walking down the sidewalk, crossing the street, and things like that. And, we can imagine perhaps a mishap occurring here and there in these settings. So what about transporting clients, say, outside of an automobile setting, whether it's walking around the community, maybe even taking public transportation or what have you?
So from an insurance standpoint, it's not really going to change much. There's no extra coverage that you should really have to buy. If you've got the general liability and things, that'll follow you walking around in the streets. So that's really not an issue. What we try to focus on is more on the risk management side and making sure the therapist has been to the park before and knows what to expect at that location at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. And that they're not going into a neighborhood that they shouldn't be in, or a park that is going to be filled with, corporate events or some other type of gathering. Somebody that's familiar with the park and knows that the playground setup is appropriate for what they're trying to do. So you're not just going there and blindsided and, there's a homeless encampment at the park the day that you show up there, or something like that would pose a different set of risks and then force you to change your plans. And then all of a sudden you're in an area you're not familiar with, or forced to hop back on a bus that maybe isn't taking you to the right spot. So it's really from an awareness standpoint. We talk to clients about social outings and what that should look like. And in a lot of cases, we've even provided a playground safety checklist, so they know that they should be looking at certain things before they go out there. From a worker safety standpoint, we want to make sure everybody's appropriately attired to do those things, whatever they're planning on. We have had claims in the past from this lady was wearing heels on a day she was doing a community outing like this, and rolled her ankle and busted some number of her toes while chasing down a child, and she was wearing high heels. And I'm
Yikes.
going, come on now, like, we need to have a little bit more common sense. But when we forget about common sense, we're left with training employees. So we went back and talked to everybody about athletic shoes and what it should look like and all of this stuff. So it happens.
Yeah, sure. I see it a lot with like folks wearing flip-flops and things like that. And I remember when I used to work for a residential company, it was like one must have closed-toed shoes, and we would have everyone, it took someone only once or twice to, get sent home to get something different to wear, because we were worried about folks getting their feet stepped on and toes broken and things like that.
Exactly. Something else we worry about are dogs in parks and on other outings. We've had a couple of people that have had employees get bitten or chased down by, the occasional rogue Rottweiler or whatever it is. So we went as far as providing one of our clients with company branded whistles for all of their people going out in certain locations, and found that the whistles were enough to scare the dogs away in the event that it happened. Yeah. So it really, thinking a little bit outside of the box, but that came about by looking at, loss history and seeing that, we've got 3 or 4 dog bites or injuries resulting from being chased by dogs in a certain area. And we were kind of told, like, look, we can't go to a different park. That's the only one there. It's supposed to be safer or whatnot. That's where they're comfortable. So we had to figure out another way to go about it. So, that helped. I think it reduced the number of incidents. I think the next 6 months after that, we only had one, and then it's kind of been steady since then. So you never know. It's a cheap fix too.
Totally. Were these just like regular whistles? Like they weren't special or anything?
Just regular whistles. And it also made the other employees that were maybe in bad neighborhoods late at night, made them feel safer getting out of their vehicles. We have had 2 separate carjackings in different neighborhoods. We had an employee at one of my clients get shot at when they were robbed. So, we talk a lot about the employee safety side of stuff when you're working late into the evening at somebody's home after school hours and it's dark outside in the winter and they've got to, walk half a block to get to their vehicle. This happens more in urban areas than other places, but it does happen. And, you get the employee that's carrying an iPad or has a bag and a purse and, toys and other things that they're carrying, and, there's nothing they can do. So we talk about, making sure you park close, taking the extra lap around the block and waiting for a parking space to open up that's closer to where you're going. But the whistles, again, in that event, seem to help a little bit.
Amazing. That's crazy. Are there other kind of general risk management things that you've worked with companies on? And these stories are oddly fascinating. Obviously, it's terrible that people are getting been carjacked and things like that. But just with that and the dogs and the shoes and whatnot, for some reason or another, again, it does remind me of that one of those commercials. What are some other either unusual or even commonly occurring things that you've done some analysis of to help your clients?
Yeah, so based on the injuries to employees that we've seen, and again, in most places, workers' compensation, your work comp costs are going to be a multiple of your other insurance costs on the property casualty side. So whereas your professional liability insurance might be $1,000 for the year, your workers' compensation is going to be $10,000 or $15,000 for the year in a lot of cases. Maybe not in New Hampshire where things are a little cheaper. In California, that's definitely the case. We have clients that pay $500,000 a year in workers' compensation premiums, and their professional liability coverage is $40,000. So it's when we focus on that aspect of it, what we're really trying to do is prevent employee injuries, to have a better safety record, to get lower premiums. So we talk a lot about intake procedures. When you're signing up a new client and going to be sending somebody to their homes, what sort of questions are you asking about that home environment? Some of the best approaches we've seen is a BCBA will go out and actually inspect the facility ahead of somebody going there. But we ask a lot of these questions on our risk assessment. Are you asking about weapons in the home? Are you asking about housekeeping and what the layout is? Are you asking about pets in the home? So you're not sending an RBT that's allergic to dogs to a house with 5 dogs. Are you asking about other family members in the home? Because we have had people that get intimidated by other family members who are around. And most people are very tight on their clinical checklists ahead of sending somebody out, but we don't find that a lot of, especially the younger agencies, are asking all of the other questions that we think that they should ask. You need to be able to pair that appropriate RBT with the appropriate clinical case. And part of that discussion for us is, what does that home environment look like?
And do you have a standard checklist that you go by, or do you kind of customize it based on the setting, or is there just a general template you work off of?
So what we do a lot is review the checklist that people are currently using, and then we'll offer suggestions and modifications. We get into a lot of trouble if we provide too many documents, but I'm more than happy to pretend I'm an attorney and review things for people and offer suggestions and guidance. So we take it more from that standpoint. And one, version of my future, I would like to be able to provide some more documentation to folks. But when it comes to their intake and clinical procedures and things, we review a lot of parent handbooks. We review a lot of clinic handbooks, and we're more just making sure they have the appropriate items in there, and we will amend or offer amendments for certain items that we see as deficient. But the intake process, I mean, it's an important aspect of everybody's business, and we'd like to see it tightened up a little bit. We've had employees that you have an employee that has a known back injury or a knee issue, and they get sent out to somebody's walk-up that has 2 or 3 flights of stairs and no elevator. And it's like, you can't be doing that. Let's send a different RBT to work with that kid, or we know we're going to have an injury, and we know we're going to have a work comp claim. So
that makes a lot of sense from where I'm sitting. So, Dan, this has been really fascinating and surprisingly so, as I mentioned earlier. If people want to get in touch with you and have more questions about this, I know I'm going to get a ton of questions, and I'm going to send people to the libertycompany.com, and you set up a page just about ABA services. So it's libertycompany.com/podcast. People can check out what you do there. But if people have questions and things like that, what's the best way to reach you?
They can reach me. Email is dlaw@libertycompany, all spelled out, .com. And a lot of what I do is just field questions from folks and try to provide some guidance and direction on things. So I think like most people that are, agency owners in this space, they want to see the level of professionalism kicked up a notch, or the way things are handled just improved upon a bit. And I've kind of tried to do as much of that from an outsider as I can. So the more we can help people with their forms, with their intake processes, with their parent handbooks, with general risk management, I will provide you any and all information that I can, whether you're a client or not, just trying to assist you through things. So, but talk to your broker. Make sure your broker knows they understand what your business is. We get that a lot, that they have to re-explain things quite a bit. But make sure you're getting the guidance that you need on stuff.
Great. Well, thanks for taking time out of your day to educate us on this really important topic.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, there you have it. Big thanks to Dan for joining us today. You can check out more info, as he said, at their website at libertycompany.com. And all their ABA-related services are at /podcast. That's libertycompany.com /podcast. And just to be completely transparent here, they are not a sponsor of the show. He just set up that landing page so there'd be a convenient place for folks to find information about what they do and how they serve the ABA community. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I forgot to mention that in the introductory comments. So anywho, I will have links to everything we talked about here at behavioralobservations.com, session 48. And having said that, that's all I have for today. I will see you in session 49. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.